Hello friends, a very warm welcome to UnSarkari. I am Vikas Bhardwaj. Today we are taking up a very important and a comprehensive concept and topic which is very relevant not only for general studies but also for certain optionals. It is important for both prelims, mains and even for your interview if you understand the concept in a very holistic manner. So what we are going to see, we are trying to evaluate FRBM Act 2003, its performance, challenges, and reforms in post-COVID-19 era. So it's a very broad area that we are taking up. So be ready and try to grasp as much aspects as possible. So what is the key objective? What is the key objective of FRBM Act, which you have read, that is Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. Again, go by the name Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management. That means to institutionalize fiscal discipline, to ensure intergenerational equity. That means to reduce fiscal and revenue deficits, to improve long-term macroeconomic stability, that means economic growth, and most importantly, to increase fiscal transparency. But how that will happen? That will happen through mandatory reporting and disclosures. That is why this act went on to set up statutory limits on fiscal deficit and government debt. And that is why I'm speaking about transparency. So it came into force July 5, 2004 and has gone several amendments since 2004, 2012, 2015 and 2018 according to scenario, according to economic requirements and policy priorities. So let's see the legal provisions, targets and amendments. So FRBM Act, as I said, it was enacted to ensure fiscal discipline. That is why deficit was supposed to be less than or around 3% of GDP by March 31st, 2021. These are the targets. So general government target of you can say the debt, that is for center and both state, is less than 60% of GDP or around that, and central government debt is less than 40% of GDP by March 31st, 2025. That means targets are set up. And not to exceed 0.5% of GDP in any financial year. That is additional, what we say is additional guarantees. That means the act is actually trying to put a kind of a guardrail through medium term fiscal policy statements. Through fiscal policy strategy statements, you can write these keywords in your answers. Macroeconomic framework statements, medium term expenditure framework statement. Each statement is actually speaking what it wants to convey. And there is an escape clause. Why escape clause? Because there can be unforeseen circumstances, both domestic and international. So one can deviate, or the government can deviate 0.4% of GDP of the total target in exceptional circumstances of national security, calamity, structural reforms, and even sharp output decline. So when we see the amendments in 2004, 2012, 15, and 18, so that means the evolution is reflecting that in the beginning, when we were putting very rigid deficit targets, with time the framework is emphasizing upon debt sustainability. Even if there is debt, it has to be taken up in a very sustained and organic way. There must be more transparency and flexibility in response to economic shocks. What do you mean by economic shock? What is happening in India's neighborhood? What is happening in Middle East? What is happening because of the policies adopted by the US? What is happening because of climate change? What is happening because of other geopolitical and global circumstances? That also means FRBM compliance, we have to see and agree that what kind of institutional mechanism and the role of Ministry of Finance in that, because compliance is very important to make sure that the FRBM Act remains relevant and it contributes. So it presents MTFP, as I just told you, FPSS, MEFS and MTEFS to the Parliament, as I just said, and then it is outlining fiscal objectives, strategies, and assumptions. There are mid-year reviews also, and trends and you can say statements are given to Parliament and corrective measures are taken up. You can just very briefly you can write in your answers. But what is most important is that we have to understand that it established a very robust compliance and review mechanism, very robust, and it also highlighted the gaps. That means constitutional oversight is helping. But the role of CAG we have to see. That is why you have annual compliance review, annual audit of FRBM compliance. What are the targets achieved? What are the trends in receipts and expenditure? And adequacy disclosures, we will just talk D1 to D5. So the key finding is that government debt peaked in 2020-21 and then declined. That is what post-COVID idea is there. And then debt remained above 60% target at 81.5% in 22-23, and then interest payments to revenue receipt ratio was 35.35%. Transparency issues, they are there, but then we are moving forward in the right direction. So these are the outcomes. What we are saying that fiscal deficit and debt ratio, if you say, they are in the declining trend, with fiscal deficit approaching the 3% target and the debt ratio is also stabilizing. And COVID-19 impact, if you read, then fiscal deficit surged to 9.2 to 9.5 of GDP in 2021. See here the COVID part. And the debt ratio spiked due to revenue collapse and increased expenditure. That is what we can see here. But then the measures were taken, the relief measures, and then post-COVID recovery you can see, and gradually it declined at the projected rate of 4.4% in the financial year 25-26. 4.4% and 4.3% in 26-27. So it's a downward path, but then it is remaining above the threshold. That's what we can say. So you have to understand the whole idea and also to put idea in the direction of understanding how our economy is using the FRBM Act. So fiscal response, I just said, so escape clause was invoked, and it allows deviation, as I told you, from 0.5% of GDP in exceptional circumstances, and then deviations were explained by the finance minister to the parliament under the relevant sections. That also means that focus shifted to revenue expenditure, focus shifted to how there is revenue shortfall is there, focus shifted to explaining how there is increased spending led to high borrowing, and that's all what we can understand here. So these fiscal measures and relief means outcomes which were there due to COVID-19. So relief and stimulus, we know Atmanirbhar Bharat, and then cash and kind support was there, and there were obviously revenue shortfall in tax and non-tax revenue. Borrowings were also increased, and that is what. Now, when we see the debt sustainability indicators, we can say that the debt stabilization indicator turned positive in financial year 21-22, and it remained so in 22-23 also, and also in the financial year 23-24, indicating that GDP growth outpaced debt accumulation. And also, one can understand by saying that fiscal stability was increasing. And when we talk about interest burden, then the interest burden, if you see the ratio of interest payment to revenue receipts, as I have written over here, then it went on to peak at 38.66% in 2021, and then it declined to 33.99%, and then went on to bit increase by to 35.35%. That means there is an effort made. Though it is a concern, it is a concern in terms of fiscal space, it is a concern in terms of sustainability, but then improvement is there in the post-pandemic time period. So there is need for continued fiscal prudence, continued transparency, and so forth, so that one can move forward. As I was just talking about transparency, disclosures, and compliance, and this is what is called deforms. So what CAG said, that tax revenue was raised but not realized. That means FRBM Act, it is mandating comprehensive disclosures, but there are inconsistencies, there are data quality issues, there are, issue of transparency. There must be more, more focus towards disclosure mechanisms and so forth. So transparency and quality of expenditure, that is very important. That also means That D2, arrears of non-tax revenues, that is also the guarantees, as I just said in the beginning. It remained within the 0.5% of the GDP limit, but inconsistencies in reportings are there. Asset register, that is what significant discrepancies in loan to states, and finally you can say liability in annuity projects. So there is variation. So what you can write in examination only, that D1 to D5, these are the forms which actually try to give us a mirror, which actually tries us to showcase the idea that quality of expenditure, or you can say the capital versus revenue spending, or the trends and so forth, what is there. So what is most important is that is post-COVID fiscal strategy has prioritized capital expenditure to support economic recovery and long-term growth. That is what we can say, as we can see over here. That this is the key takeaway, that fiscal strategy has prioritized, as I'm again repeating, that there must be capital expenditure, there must be economic recovery, there must be long-term growth work, as we can see through infrastructure, as we can see through large logistic projects, whether it is Gati Shakti, whether it is bullet train, whether it is coming of highways, whether it's coming of new airports, whether it is coming through, you know, maritime and other kind of long-term support measures taken up, including digitization and also GST reforms. GST and tax reforms, as I just said, very important because they also helped in enhancing revenue mobilization, because it replaced multiple indirect taxes. You're going to mention in your answer in your notes. And then it also exceeded post-COVID time period. Both direct and indirect taxes now contribute, direct taxes contribute more than 57% of the gross tax revenue, with indirect taxes making up for the remainder. So when we say the revenue performance, non-tax revenue, GST revenue, as you can say by 2024-25, the non-tax revenue, the percentage of GDP is about 1.7%, and in case of GST revenue, it is about 22.08 lakh crore. So extra budgetary resources, off budget liabilities, and contingent liabilities. You cannot write all these terms, but in the optional definitely you have to write that. So there are transparency issues, as I told you. There have been discrepancies across budget documents. Liabilities raised by PSUs and serviced by the union budget, but not always included in the official debt disclosures. This is the gap. Like MTNL, FCI, they were not consistently put up to that benchmark. So what they do, they are actually creating and also manifesting more fiscal risks. And that is why it is complicating debt sustainability assessments. Money you have taken, how you're going to give back if you don't have the resources, if you don't have a plan. That is the whole problematic area. And the guarantees, as I told you previously also, which remain within the 0.5% of the GDP limit, but outstanding guarantees and contingent liabilities, they require close monitoring, especially at the state level, especially from power sector reforms, for example, scheme like Uday. That is actually creating enhanced fiscal risks. So the state level FRBM framework and the center state coordination is very important, because all states, they have enacted their own FRBM acts, and they do try to align with the center targets, but then performance is very much, varying widely, because some states are maintaining surpluses, are facing high debt, and in fact lot of deficits. So what you can quote in the answer, Niti Aayog's fiscal health index. And then you can also give example, states like West Bengal, Punjab and Kerala, they are lagging behind, but then certain states like Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, they are top performers. And center also sets annual borrowing ceilings for states under Article 293.3, as we have discussed in our other lecture. And additional borrowing is also linked with fiscal performance. That means central state coordination is the key to make sure that FRBM targets are achieved. And tensions are there because states argue that the central FRBM targets, they are actually putting foot on their fiscal autonomy, and they are not taking into account state specific needs and shocks. That is why most states lack well defined escape clauses. They must have that, and they must have the flexibility. And the off budget borrowings must also be taken into account, for example, in the power state. So the current design of FRBM Act having an escape clause which is permitting deviations from fiscal deficit up to 0.5% of GDP in exceptional circumstances. Now this has been supporting further into action of FRBM Act, but whether it has been able to bring the results, that is the whole point. So encasing committee, it recommended clear, transparent triggers for invoking the escape clause. There must be very clear, there must be deviations allowed only on the advice of an independent fiscal council, not on whims and fancies. So there are critiques and there are recommendations that frequent invocations of escape clause, for example, financial crisis, GST rollout, COVID-19, that is weakening the act's credibility and enforcement. Even newspapers like Financial Express, Business Standard, they highlight the need for more precise and transparent limited escape. Not like every time you're using it. More flexible and counter-cyclical framework that allows for larger deviation during severe shocks, but with a clear path and oversight, which is missing. So encasing committee recommendations, it is actually saying that there must be debt anchor. So use debt to GDP ratio, 60% general government, 40% center, 20% states as the primary fiscal anchor. And there must be certain annual glide path for fiscal reduction. There must be fiscal council. Multi-year fiscal forecast must be there. Changes to fiscal strategy according to need must be there. Escape clause, as I just said, it must be discussed more specifically and objectively. Monitoring of compliance and data quality. Allowed deviation only in the specified circumstances with a maximum deviation of 0.4% per year, only with the advice of fiscal council. So the medium-term expenditure framework, as I just said when we were talking about the finance minister, and in the beginning when we said that it is being presented to the parliament, so adopt a rolling 3-year expenditure plan and eliminate revenue deficit. The target elimination of revenue deficit by 2022-23 was there, and the state debt trajectories, as I just told you, Finance Commission must be asked to recommend state-specific debt trajectories based on fiscal prudence. So what is the implementation status of many ideas which were being spoken? The 2018 FRBM amendment, it incorporated debt anchor and escape clause, but fiscal council has not been established yet. So the newspapers, including Financial Express and Business Standard, when we read different articles, they talk about institutionalizing fiscal council and adopting a more flexible and transparent fiscal framework. Now let's see what the whole world is doing in that context. Switzerland is having debt break, so strict structural deficit limit. Germany is also having the strict structural deficit limit, escape clause for crisis only. And in Canada, there is a debt anchor, non-binding debt to GDP ratio, different country, different idea. UK is also having fiscal anchor and the rules. In EU, you have debt ceiling, 3% of GDP deficit. And Norway's wealth fund rule is there. And in case of Australia, there is asset recycling, monetization of public asset to fund new infrastructure. But then every country is different. And none of them is like India. We are speaking about the Western world having developed economy and different scenario. So what are the lessons for India? Debt anchors widely used as medium to long-term fiscal guides, allowing operational flexibility. Escape clause. Most frameworks include escape clauses for crisis, but a clear trigger and oversight, which is not there in case of India. Fiscal council, which is not there in case of India. Asset monetization, which is there, but then we have, our own way of doing it. If you read newspapers and you know that when the government try to monetize its assets, which are not strategic in nature, so that they can move forward. So market perception, bond markets and sovereign ratings is also linked with FRBM Act because India's government securities have remained stable and they are giving average yields and declining in post-pandemic due to accommodative monetary policy. But what we can say is that average maturity of government securities has increased and the risk is being reduced. Even sovereign ratings, the global ratings, they actually cite India's economic growth, fiscal consolidation, improve public credibility, but then there is more to it and we must move forward. You can just mention it in your answer in a few lines or few words. Asset monetization, national monetization pipeline and fiscal space, as I just told you, the government is actually using this as a fiscal tool, asset monetization. So for example, brownfield assets, the one which is already there with the government, worth 6 lakh crore, supporting non-debt capital receipts and fiscal consolidation. Road, railways, power, telecom, oil and gas warehouses, wherever possible. Government wants to monetize. Infrastructure investment trust, very important for the mains exam. And real estate investment trust, they are also enable of pooling investor funds and recycling of public assets. But this has to be done in such a way that it brings results. Asset monetization reduces reliance on debt, very true, and it aligns with the debt sustainability goals of the FRBM Act. So what are the successes? Fiscal deficit reduced from 5.8% in 2002 to 2003 to 2.6% in 2008. Debt to GDP ratio also reduced. Transparency increased with time. Post-COVID recovery, as I just told you, capital expenditure had been prioritized for growth. What are the shortcomings? Frequent deviations, I just told you. GFC, GST rollout, COVID, and so forth. Overuse of escape clauses. Transparency gaps are there. Weak enforcement is there. Rigid targets are being kept up. And the center-state tensions we have discussed in details. So the finding says that there is need for flexible fiscal rule. One, independent oversight fiscal councils. Two, and improved transparency. And also there must be, shift to debt anchor with operational flexibility. That means overuse must not be there, enforcement must be there, center state framework must be more harmonized, there must be quality expenditure must be prioritized, focus on capital expenditure and productive investment, and adoptive medium term expenditure framework. These key words must be there in your answers. So harmonizing center state fiscal frameworks, joint targets and monetary mechanisms, integrate asset monetization, innovative financing, leverage asset monetization through NMP, INVITs and REITs as we just said, to generate non-debt capital receipts. This word must be there in your answer, otherwise you are not going to get the score. What are the recommendations? Reassess rigid fiscal targets. Shift to debt GDP anchor. Institutionalize an independent fiscal council. Established statutory fiscal council to monitor compliance. Strengthen escape clause design. All these points I have just said, but I am reiterating so that you can make your own notes and try to have a very brief, short but smart note of your own you can write in your answers. So recommendations are enhanced transparency and accountability, mandate timely disclosures of deforms, off-budget borrowings and contingent liabilities must be reduced, integrate all fiscal risks into medium-term planning, reinstate medium-term fiscal planning. So there must be economic terms in your answers which you must be writing, not exactly technically, but even 50% of what we have spoken if you are bringing in your answer, then therefore you will be getting a good score on this concept, whether it is prelims, whether it is mains. How we can conclude? We can say FRBM Act remained pivotal in shaping India's fiscal discipline and transparency. You can write in your introduction also. Pandemic exposed to limitations of rigid financial rules and it need for greater flexibility, transparency and institutional oversight, and the fiscal consolidation has resumed post-pandemic with focus on capital expenditure, revenue mobilization, and debt sustainability. That's how what you can bring in your conclusion. Reforms are needed, yes. As I told you, adopt debt anchor, institutionalize independent fiscal council, strengthen escape clause design and transparency, harmonize center-state relations, and integrate innovative financing. So there will be a reformed FRBM framework which will be leading to Viksit Bharat in the time to come. So with this, we finish this lecture with the belief and thought process that on the same lines you are going to create all your micro themes so that you are able to achieve not only very good score in the mains examination, but also be happy whatever is the result coming with your preparation and never in the regret that I could have done something better. Get success with UnSarkari, join our courses, programs and get back to us for sincere, honest, authentic and a transparent approach. Thank you very much.